A silence deeper than guilt. The day he felt nothing. That day was excessively bright. Not warm, not cool, just bright enough to shorten shadows and leave people with nowhere to hide. Ethan Hale stood by the window, staring at the street without truly focusing on anything. Cars passed by. People moved along. Sounds collided and slipped past one another like waves that never quite reached the shore. The phone rang. Ethan took a few seconds before walking toward it, not out of reluctance, but because there was no urgency. He picked it up. "Ethan." The woman's voice was formal, tired. "Yes. I'm calling from the care facility. Your Uncle Tom passed away last night." Ethan paused, not to absorb the news, but to find the next sentence. "I understand." The woman waited, as if expecting something, perhaps a sigh, perhaps a question. "The ceremony will be tomorrow morning." "I'll be there." The call ended. Ethan placed the phone on the table and returned to the window. The same cars, the same people. Nothing had changed, not even inside him. He neither loved his Uncle Tom nor hated him. He simply existed, like an old picture on the wall you've looked at for years until it no longer stirs anything. He opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and drank. His thirst faded, but no feeling followed. He thought he should probably feel sad. The thought came and went, like all the others. That night, he went to bed early. No prayers, no reflection. Streetlights spilled through the curtain, casting soft shapes on the wall. The shadows moved gently. Ethan closed his eyes. In the morning, he dressed in black, not as a sign of grief, but because it fit the occasion. On the subway, people looked at him, or maybe he imagined it. No one spoke. At the ceremony, voices were low. Tays, some real, some rehearsed, fell without distinction. When it was Ethan's turn, he simply lowered his head. No lump in his throat, no tightness in his chest. Only light, that same unbearable light. A relative approached him. "Are you okay?" Ethan paused. "I'm fine." That was when he noticed the first strange look. Not anger, not pity, something closer to suspicion, as if lacking emotion itself were an unspoken crime. Ethan did not know that from this moment on, everything had begun. A city where heat passed judgment. The city after the ceremony was the same city as before, only now, something invisible had been added to it. When Ethan stepped out of the subway, the air felt heavier, not from heat, but from eyes. The streets seemed longer, the buildings taller, and people walked with calculated distances between them, as if each carried an invisible boundary. Ethan had realized that people listen less to what you say than to how you react. When a reaction doesn't match expectation, their minds begin to write stories. And stories are always more dangerous than reality. At work, everything appeared normal. The desks were in place. The sound of typing filled the room. Stale coffee lingered in the air, and the windows still faced the street. Yet something had changed. His co-workers asked fewer questions, joked less. One of them said quietly, "I heard. My condolences." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." That was all. The conversation didn't continue, but the silence that followed was not ordinary. It felt as though everyone was waiting for something to emerge from him. Grief, anger, collapse. When none came, the silence grew heavier. At noon, Ethan went outside for lunch. The sun shone directly overhead. Shadows collapsed beneath feet. Eyes burned. He sat on a bench and opened his container. He chewed the first bite. He could taste it, but there was no pleasure. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It simply existed. A short distance away, two people spoke softly. He heard his name. Then silence. Ethan didn't listen, not out of indifference, but because listening or not listening changed nothing. For the first time, it occurred to him that perhaps the problem wasn't him. Perhaps the problem was that the world didn't know what to do with someone who refused to perform. That night, when he returned home, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the couch. The day's heat still clung to the walls. He opened the window. The city's noise rose. Horns, footsteps, distant laughter. Ethan thought that if he cried, everything would be easier. People would accept him more readily. But crying wasn't something one could choose. It either came or it didn't. And it hadn't. In the darkness, for a brief moment, something tightened inside him. Not sadness, not fear, just awareness. Awareness that society does not forgive indifference. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is unpredictable. An incident that happened, not a decision that was made. The afternoon was heavier than usual. The heat settled on the skin like an invisible layer, refusing to lift. Ethan walked his familiar route, a narrow street passing an old park. The trees were sluggish, their leaves barely stirring. The benches stood empty, as if the city had chosen to hide indoors. He walked slowly, not from fatigue, but because there was no urgency. His mind wasn't empty, yet it wasn't crowded either. Thoughts drifted in and out without purpose, without demand. At the far end of the park, a man stood still. At first, Ethan paid no attention. People were always there. But as he drew closer, he noticed the man was staring at him. Not hostile, not friendly, just watching. Ethan passed him. After his second step, a sound followed, short, sharp. Perhaps a word, perhaps an objection. Ethan turned. The man stepped closer. The distance shrank. The air thickened. Nothing changed inside Ethan. Not his heartbeat, not his expression, only the understanding that the situation had shifted. The man raised his hand. The movement was quick, unannounced. Ethan didn't step back. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't foolishness. No reaction came. The man's hand struck his shoulder, a light pressure. Enough. What followed did not take the shape of a decision in Ethan's mind. It was like a glass slipping from a table. A movement that happens, not one that is chosen. His hand moved forward, not forcefully, not with intent. The man lost his balance, stepped back, caught his foot on the curb. There was the sound of impact, then silence. Everything felt both fast and slow. Distant noises, heat, light. The man lay on the ground. His eyes were open, but they were not seeing. Ethan stood there, not shocked, not afraid, just standing. People began to gather. Voices rose. Words collided. "What did you do?" Someone shouted. "Did you see how he hit him?" Another said. Ethan said nothing, because there was nothing to say. What had happened was neither good nor evil in his mind. It was simply real. When the police arrived, the heat was unchanged. The light still shone mercilessly. Ethan found it strange that the world had not paused, not even for a moment. Inside the police car, he looked at his hands. Ordinary hands. Not bloody, not shaking, just hands. That was when he understood. Some events are not born of intention, nor of malice, but of the indifference of a moment. And that is the most dangerous kind of event. Rooms that do not return sound. The interrogation room was smaller than Ethan had expected. The walls were painted in neutral shade, neither white nor gray, something in between, as if even the color refused to take a stance. The ceiling light cast a cold glow, sharpening shadows rather than deepening them. Ethan sat on the metal chair. It was bolted to the floor. He noticed these details without knowing why. Perhaps when a person has nothing to do, insignificant things demand attention. The officer across from him opened a folder. The sound of paper filled the room, then vanished. "Your name?" Ethan answered. His voice was ordinary, neither firm nor trembling. Occupation. He answered, "Did you know the man?" "No." The officer nodded, wrote something down, paused, then asked, "Why did you hit him?" Ethan thought for a moment, not to find the right answer, but to understand the question itself. "I didn't hit him." The officer looked up. His gaze was neither angry nor surprised, just tired. "We have witnesses." Ethan shrugged, not out of disrespect, but helplessness. "I pushed him." The words fell into the room and stayed there. The officer waited for more. Nothing followed. Why? This time, Ethan paused longer. He searched his mind like someone looking for a lost object without knowing exactly what it was. Because he stepped closer. The officer sighed. "That's not an answer." Ethan looked at the wall. There was a small stain near the power outlet. It had probably been there for years. "It is for me." After a few more questions, a long silence settled in, meant to pressure Ethan into speaking. But silence, if stretched long enough, loses its force. When they led him to the holding cell, the air was still warm. It wasn't night yet, but the sunlight had weakened. The corridor smelled of metal and dampness. The cell was plain. A bed, a blanket, walls. Ethan sat down. The door closed with a firm, indifferent sound. He thought he should feel something. Fear, regret, anger. None arrived. Instead, there was a quiet fatigue. Not of the body, not of the mind, but the weariness of explaining things that cannot be explained. When night came, the city's sounds drifted in from afar. Horns, engines, a life that continued. Ethan stayed at the ceiling and understood that prison does not merely confine a person, it severs them from meaning. And that separation is silent and merciless. Days that resemble one another. Days in detention had no names. They were neither Mondays nor Fridays. They were repetitions, quiet, unobtrusive repetitions that didn't exhaust a person, but emptied them. Ethan woke each morning to a sound that felt more habitual than commanding. Light entered through a small window high on the wall, a restricted, fractured light, as if even the sun lacked permission to come in freely. He sat up, folded his blanket, and waited. What he waited for was unclear. In the small yard, prisoners walked. Some talked, some smoked, some simply paced and stopped. Ethan mostly watched, not out of curiosity, but because watching was the simplest thing to do. Occasionally, a man would stop beside him. He never gave his name. He only said once, "Do you think time works differently here?" Ethan considered it. "No, we are the ones who change." The man laughed, a brief, unmotivated laugh, and walked away. In his cell, Ethan didn't deliberately think about the past. Memories arrived on their own. Simple images, walking down a street, the sound of a glass on a table, the heat of that afternoon. None of them were heavy. They simply existed. He realized that the absence of strong emotion was itself a kind of emotion. Something like a void, neither painful nor comforting. One day, his lawyer came, a tidy man in a light-colored suit. His words were precise, rehearsed. "We need to show remorse." "Why?" "It helps." Ethan looked at the window. "And if it isn't there?" The lawyer paused. "Everyone feels remorse." Ethan said nothing. He wasn't sure whether lying about remorse was worse than lacking it. At night, when the lights went out, sounds multiplied, coughing, whispers, the shifting of beds. Ethan listened, not to find meaning, but to reassure himself that he was still part of a group, however unwillingly. Slowly, he understood that a human being can grow accustomed to almost anything, even in the most confined spaces. To walls, to silence, and even to the absence of answers. And that kind of adaptation is more frightening than any punishment. when meaning is demanded. The courtroom was housed in an old building, one that evoked habit more than justice. The walls were tall, the windows narrow, and the air carried the scent of aged paper and anticipation. Ethan sat on the wooden bench, his hands resting on his knees. His gaze stayed forward, not out of focus, but out of indifference to the surroundings. People entered quietly. Their voices were brief and restrained, as if everyone understood this was not a place for loud speech. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Ethan stood as well, without haste, without emphasis. Sitting again felt like a rehearsed movement, synchronized and hollow. The prosecutor began to speak. His words were heavy, filled with meanings prepared in advance. He spoke of violence, intent, and responsibility. Each term fit neatly into place, like components of a solid structure. When it was Ethan's turn, the judge asked, "Do you have anything to say?" The question was simple, but Ethan understood its deception. They expected something comprehensible, something measurable. He paused, not out of fear, but care. "I can explain what happened," he said, "but I can't add anything to it." Silence followed. "I wasn't angry that day. I wasn't upset either. I was simply there." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "So you claim it was accidental?" Ethan shook his head. "No, it wasn't an accident. It just didn't have meaning." This time, the silence was heavier. The judge looked at him, searching for something: remorse, fear, at least uncertainty. "You took a human life," the judge said. "I know," Ethan replied, "but knowing doesn't create feeling." His lawyer stepped forward, trying to soften the moment. He spoke of circumstances, of pressure, of a fleeting instant. But Ethan understood that every explanation merely laid over something that was, at its core, simple and empty. When the verdict was delivered, the judge's voice was flat, neither harsh nor kind, just official. Ethan listened without shock, without protest, as if hearing the outcome of something that had occurred long ago. As he was led out of the courtroom, sunlight briefly touched his face. The same light, the same heat, the same indifference. He understood then that the court does not judge truth as much as it refuses to tolerate the absence of meaning. What remains? The morning of the transfer was cooler than usual. Not because the season had changed, but perhaps because Ethan no longer expected anything from the weather. He put on his plain clothes, gathered his few belongings, and stood still. Standing had become a meaningless habit. The prison vehicle moved slowly. Streets passed behind the glass. People, shops, trees. Everything was the same, and yet no longer the same for him. He wasn't sad. He wasn't regretful. He was simply a witness. In the new prison, the cell was larger. It had a window that revealed a small portion of sky. Not much, but enough. Ethan sat near it. The morning light fell across the wall, forming a pale line. Days passed, not with hope, not with despair, but with order, with repetition, with a silence that no longer hurt. He had come to understand that if meaning does not arrive from the outside, perhaps it does not need to be pursued. One day in the yard, a young man sat beside him. First time. Ethan shook his head. No. The man stayed quiet for a while, then asked, "Do you think there's something waiting for you outside?" Ethan looked at the sky. Clouds moved slowly. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm sure the world isn't waiting for my explanation." The man laughed, this time more genuinely. That night, Ethan lay on his bed. The sounds of the prison flowed as they always did, but among them was something new, a kind of acceptance. Not surrender, not false hope, just the acceptance that life, even when meaningless, continues. He thought that freedom is not always beyond walls. Sometimes, freedom is being released from the obligation to assign meaning to everything. He closed his eyes, not in fear of tomorrow, not in expectation of redemption, but with a simple calm. He was alive, and for now, that was enough.